Let's get started with our next topic. The Civil War review is followed by a period of Reconstruction. Think about the term reconstructing. Construct is in there, construction is in it, but Reconstruction would suggest it's putting something back together. This part of the unit has 4 topics, or 4 sections, if you will. Reconstruction Plans is where we start today. As for Reconstruction Plans, you'll notice or pay attention to the plural in that. How does the United States put the Union back together? And there is more than one plan that is introduced as we get set to begin. Let's set the stage before we dive into Reconstruction. The South lost the war, the North won. 11 states had seceded. Slavery was abolished. How does the nation put itself back together? How do you bring states back into the Union that had opted out? The South had seceded for reasons, and those reasons were not exactly solved or made any better by the time the Civil War comes to an end. The North had seen the South secede. How do you put a nation back together so it feels like a nation again? Before we begin, let's take a look at some vocabulary terms that are essential for the learning in this part of the unit. Reconstruction is one of the terms, and this is the period from 1865 to 1877, post-Civil War. Radical Republicans is a term that we see here. We'll dive more into that later. Impeach. I know you've heard that term from more recently, but it applies to this unit as well. Black codes. We're going to see the limitation of freedoms for Black people in the United States. The Wade-Davis bill, also known as the 50% plan, and then Lincoln's 10% plan. 2 of the 3 plans on Reconstruction proposed by groups or individuals. Then we have the 14th and 15th Amendments. We just had the 13th, which abolished slavery. A couple of additional ones after that take place in Reconstruction. Finally, the Civil Rights Act of 1866. We'll discuss that today, and then the Freedmen's Bureau. Let's take a look at what this prompt says. Develop a rudimentary plan to rejoin the South to the Union, but protect the new established doctrine of freed slaves and abolishment of slavery. This is what the United States as a nation is set out to do, or must set out to do. What would your plan be if you were thrust into this scenario? Okay, then let's take a look at this era of Reconstruction. And ideas for how to reconstruct a nation actually began before the end of the Civil War. As you can see, Reconstruction plans were already being developed during the year 1864, and that comes before 1865 and the end of the Civil War. The Civil War ends April of 1865, and that's when Reconstruction truly begins. But we first have the Reconstruction plans and their proposals a little bit earlier. 1865, Civil War ends, and then shortly afterward, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. And one of the key aspects of this is Abraham Lincoln has a Reconstruction plan. It is rather lenient, but his goal of bringing the Union back together is part of the reason why it is rather lenient. Andrew Johnson becomes president, and he also has an idea of what Reconstruction should be, how to bring the southern states back into the Union. But with Abraham Lincoln being assassinated, that plan, his 10% plan, kind of goes by the wayside. And then Andrew Johnson's plan is a plan that is, I guess, has its time on stage and its consideration. In 1865, the Civil War has come to an end, and we have the 13th Amendment being that has been abolished. Then you get the creation of the Freedmen's Bureau. Think about that first word. It's not the first time we've seen it in this presentation, and it won't be the last. Freedmen. Okay. What do you do as a nation, or what do you do as individuals with these freed individuals now that slavery has been abolished? And the Freedmen's Bureau is going to help out with that. There are some shortcomings that occur with the Freedmen's Bureau, but one of the most successful aspects of the Freedmen's Bureau is the educational system that is developed out of it. And we'll hear a little bit more on the Freedmen's Bureau shortly. 1865 continues, and in 1865, the same year the Civil War comes to an end, we already see the creation of black codes. And not only are they beginning, but they are spreading throughout the South. That is one of the challenges faced by the United States, and specifically what's happening in the South. You have some big amendments like the 13th Amendment, where slavery is abolished, and then the 14th and 15th, providing more civil rights for African Americans, but black codes are kind of sidestepping the big law, and finding ways to still limit the civil rights that have been obtained by blacks in the United States. At the end of 1865, President Johnson, had allowed most states back into the Union, and this was more lenient than what the Republicans had wanted, and they have a major problem with it. Their response to that is the Republicans are going to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Keep in mind how passing a law works. Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, but then it goes to the president. The president, in this case, President Johnson, vetoes the Civil Rights Act of 1866. However, given the historical time period, Republicans have a lot of say in Congress. Republicans hold many seats, and because of that, they are actually able to overturn the veto by President Johnson. This is the first time Congress has ever overturned a veto by a sitting president. And that's what happens here. It's also going to be the start of the Republicans in Congress saying that Andrew Johnson, this is too much. He's not doing what he's supposed to do. We'll touch on that shortly. 1866 to 1868. Ultimately, 1868 is when the 14th Amendment is passed. But in 1866, the 14th Amendment, with all the Republicans in Congress, they worked to pass the 14th Amendment. As we continue this earlier Reconstruction, if you will, Republicans really work toward their own Reconstruction plan. They don't like what President Johnson has done by being very lenient on the South and coming back, and many elite whites prior to the Civil War still are in power after as Reconstruction begins. And sure enough, Republicans take more measures to try and ensure rights of African Americans in the South. And they do this by passing the Military Reconstruction Act of 1867. That's linked there, so there's more on that, if you will. But military reconstruction, the South will be divided into military districts, and the military, the Union Army, if you will, really has power to enforce, whatever they feel necessary, if you will. 1870, the 15th Amendment is passed. It's now President Ulysses S. Grant, and the 15th Amendment is passed at that time. Let's look at the plans for Reconstruction. On the far left, you see Lincoln's. The other one I really want to pay attention to is the Radical Republican plan on the far right. This was the Wade Davis bill. That's where we can connect that to. But Lincoln's plan required 10% of the state's voters to take an oath of loyalty to the Union. Yes, the Union government is the government. They are not part of the Confederate States of America any longer. It also required states to accept emancipation of slaves, so slaves would have to be freed. And then there are opportunities for full pardons from former Confederates. Shift over to the Radical Republican plan. 50% of states' voters have to take an oath of loyalty. Lot different. You see the leniency in Lincoln's plan, and really, if you will, maybe the harsher measures demanded by the Radical Republicans. The South gets divided into 5 military districts. We see that passing in 1867 with the Military Reconstruction Act. It requires state legislatures to adopt new constitutions guaranteeing African American suffrage. So we're going from Lincoln's plan, which is saying, hey, slaves are emancipated, they're free, to the Radical Republican plan saying civil rights. The vote is what African Americans will get now. And then finally, required states to ratify the 14th Amendment in order to seat representatives in Congress. So if Southern Democrats really wanted to have an opportunity to sit in Congress, well, the state needed to ratify the 14th Amendment, which eventually does happen. Johnson's plan in the middle, he was Democrat. He did not like planters, those big plantation owners who had the economic, social, and political power. He did not like them, did not want them to come back into power, but still he was extremely lenient with what Reconstruction was and giving out pardons and letting the South come back into the Union rather easily. His plan required former Confederates with property worth $20,000 or more to obtain a presidential pardon. Okay, so this is Johnson showing his dislike for the elite class in the South. Okay, otherwise, he would give a full pardon to many other Confederates in the government or Confederate soldiers, whoever it did apply to. And then it did require ratification of the 13th Amendment. Keep in mind that was the abolishment of slavery. So there is a leniency similarity between Lincoln and Johnson, but how Johnson carried it out was much different. And with a little bit of time, just a little bit of time, the Radical Republicans, who had a lot of control in Congress, really despised Johnson and come after him by impeaching him. If you revisit the slideshow presentation, don't hesitate to click on the links that you can see that you saw in earlier slides. They provide more background on the different topics. Otherwise, we'll continue Reconstruction another day.